Hello, welcome to part 2 of the AQA A-Level Sociology Theory and Methods video, and now we're going to be looking at the theoretical side. Firstly, perspectives. There are two main types of sociological theory. Structural or macro perspectives examine the way in which society as a whole fits together. For example, Marxism and functionalism, they tend to see human activity as a product of social structure. Social action, interpretive or micro perspectives, examine smaller groups of people in society and are connected with the subjective states of individuals. They tend to see society as a product of human activity. Many theories don't fit into one category. There are variations with perspectives, and some studies combine elements of both approaches. For example, Weber used structural and social action theories in his general approach, and postmodernism can't be clearly categorized in terms of these concepts. Functionalism views society as a system with interconnected parts. Early functionalists use a biological analogy, comparing parts of society to the parts of a human body. This means that both humans and societies have certain basic needs or functional prerequisites that must be met to survive. Social institutions exist to meet these functional prerequisites. Institutions are studied by identifying ways in which they contribute to meeting needs. The function of an institution is seen in terms of its contribution to the survival of society. Some functionalists accept that there are many aspects of society that are dysfunctional, which prevent it from operating smoothly, but they generally pay little attention to them. Functionalism has been accused of having a conservative ideology. It tends to support preservation of the status quo, since anything that persists in society is seen as a useful function. Durkheim believed that people were constrained by social facts, a way of acting, thinking, and feeling in a society. Shared moral codes shaped individual consciousness. Some facts were caused by other social facts. For example, Durkheim found that religion has an influence on suicide rates. Social facts can be explained in terms of the functions they perform for society. Parts of society would only persist if they served a useful function. Societies need a collective conscience or shared morality in order to function successfully. Modern industrial societies could be interrupted by the existence of anomie and egoism. Both anomie and egoism stem from a complex division of labour. People did specialist jobs, and this weakened solidarity in society. Parson believed that all societies needed a value consensus upon shared goals. Societies develop rules based upon value consensus and norms about how people should behave, which fitted in with these overall goals. When individuals are socialized to accept the values, goals, and norms of society, equilibrium is achieved. Parsons saw society as a system with four basic functional prerequisites. Adaptation, the need for an economic system to ensure the survival of members in society. Goal attainment, the need to set goals, a function primarily carried out by the government. Integration, the need to control conflict, a function carried out by the legal system. And pattern maintenance, the maintenance of values achieved largely through education, religion, and family life. Social change also involves the development of specialist institutions like the welfare state. Merton accepted that societies didn't always work smoothly. He argued that parts of society could be dysfunctional and might prevent society from running smoothly. For example, Merton thought crime and deviance could result from anomie, a situation where people put too much emphasis on goals and not enough on using their legitimate means to achieve them. Functionalism has been accused of being teleological. This means that they confuse cause and effect. Functionalism also assumes the existence of a value consensus and ignores conflict and diversity in society. And it's overly deterministic, seeing all human behaviour as shaped by the needs of a social system, and makes no allowance for the fact that individuals have choices about how they behave. In Marxist theory, all societies apart from the communist ones have two main classes, the owners of the means of production and the non-owners. This means if production are those things that are necessary to produce other things, such as land, capital, raw materials, labour power and machinery. In capitalist societies, the ruling class or bourgeoisie own capital, while the proletariat own only labour power which they have to sell to the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie use the superstructure to stabilise society. They encourage the development of a false class consciousness whereby people see a corrupt society as fair and just. Marx saw history in terms of conflict between social classes. Marxism is based upon a philosophy of dialectical materialism, the idea that history proceeds through the clash of material forces, particularly classes. Marx saw society as having a material base, based on work and the production of goods. In the earliest stages of history under primitive communism, there was no economic surplus and no private wealth, so classes didn't exist. As some individuals began to accumulate wealth, they passed it down to their children, and this is how classes emerged. Power tended to be monopolized by a ruling class minority, who dominated a subject class majority. This caused tension and provided the potential for conflict. The ruling class used their control over institutions, such as organized religion, to justify or legitimate their position and persuade the subject class that they weren't being exploited. Marx argued that humans became increasingly alienated from their true selves and their interests. Religion was a form of alienation, since people created in their minds a non-existent alien being, which then controlled their behaviour. In capitalist societies where people worked for wages and companies made surplus value, workers became alienated from their work. They were alienated because they worked for other people, lacked control over their work, and didn't own the products that they were producing. An end to alienation and exploitation could only be achieved in a communist society, in which there was no private property. Instead, there would be communal ownership of the means of production. There would be no classes and therefore no exploitation. Instead of working for others to make profit, people would work for the good of society as a whole. Marx predicted that the proletariat would become aware that they were being exploited and they would develop class consciousness. The proletariat would become increasingly exploited and suffer from crises in the capitalist system. They would become aware of increasing inequality between themselves and the bourgeoisie. They would organise themselves into trade unions, political parties, and revolutionary movements to overthrow capitalism and establish a communist society. Critics have argued that capitalism has developed and that class consciousness has reduced rather than increased. Marxism seeks to exaggerate the importance of economic factors, ignoring the influence of ideas and culture. Is economically deterministic, seeing individuals' behaviour as determined by the economic system, and neglecting the extent to which individuals have free choice. Marxism also emphasises class differences and pays too little attention to gender, ethnicity, sexuality, age, lifestyle, and others. Neo-Marxists are strongly influenced by Marx, but reject one or more aspects of his work. Neo-Marxists tend to place more emphasis on the cultural and ideological factors than Marx did, and focus less exclusively on economic factors. He suggested that ownership of means of production was not enough to guarantee control for the ruling class. It needed to make alliances with other classes and make real concessions in order to attain hegemony. Gramsci also saw aspects of superstructure as having some independence from the ruling class. Conflict theories emphasize the importance of conflict between different groups in society. Weber is seen as the pioneer of conflict theory. He has argued that other groupings in society may be in conflict as well as status groups. Conflict may take place between occupational groupings, men and women, ethnic or religious groups, different age groups, heterosexuals and homosexuals, the disabled and able-bodied, and others. A problem with conflict theory is that so many groups can be seen as being in conflict that it's difficult to get a clear picture of how society works. Postmodernists argue that social divisions are no longer of great significance. Feminism is a type of conflict theory which sees a conflict of interest between males and females as the most important type of conflict in society. Feminists believe that most or all existing and historical societies are patriarchal. Feminist theories try to explain inequality and differences between men and women and suggest what should be done about them. Many feminists believe that mainstream sociology has a masculine bias. Abbott et al. Identify the following ways in which sociology has been seen as mainstream. More research has been conducted about men than women, and it's been generalised to all people despite the all-male samples. Issues of particular concern to women have been neglected. Women are often presented in sexist ways. Gender is often just added onto existing variables and is not seen as having the central importance that all feminists believe it should have. Radical feminists believe that women are exploited by and are subservient to men. Society is patriarchal, where men are the ruling class and women are the subject class. Radical feminists explain the inequality in various ways. Some see biology as the cause, others see culture or male violence as more important. Firestone argues that the sexual class system is the most fundamental form of stratification. The biological family results from women being burdened by pregnancy, childbirth, breastfeeding, and menstruation. They become dependent on men and power psychology develops, which maintains female oppression. Millett believes that several factors are important in maintaining female oppression. Biology through superior male strength and the use of violence like rape, sexual violence, and the use of force to underpin male power. Ideological factors and socialization, where sociology causes women to interiorize. Women have a caste-like status, meaning even higher class women are subordinate to men. Myth and religion is used as justification for this, and they also have educational and economic inequalities. Critics point out that in some societies, women seem less disadvantaged by biology than others. Rowbottham questions the usefulness of a vague term like patriarchy, also denying that all men exploit women. Marxist and socialist feminists see the capitalist system as the main source of women's oppression. They stress the importance of exploitation of women as paid and unpaid workers. Some would like to see a communist society established. They've put forward a number of explanations of how the oppression of women started. Engels argued that gender inequality had a materialist base. The monogamous family only developed once herding of animals replaced hunting and gathering. Men used monogamous marriage to control women's sexuality so that they could identify their own biological children and pass down their herds of cattle to them. Men have retained power because of access to work, particularly well-paid work, and the expected inequalities to reduce once women gain greater access to well-paid employment. Benson argued that women are used as a reserve army of labour, benefiting capitalism by keeping wages low. They are relatively docile and an easily exploited workforce. Engels' theory is not based on sound empirical evidence, and his analysis also fails to explain why and when society began to divide into classes. It was men who managed to control property rights for their own benefit, and why they would need to secure their inheritance after centuries of not doing so. The liberal feminist perspective is associated with campaigners for equal rights who want reform to improve women's position rather than revolution. They also attribute inequality to sexism, discrimination, and sex role stereotyping and socialization. Liberal feminists accept that women have made considerable progress in gaining rights and improving their position in society. However, they still believe that there is some way to go before equality is achieved. Walter believes that there is still much that feminists need to change. He believes that continuing problems of inequality affect all women. Women still tend to suffer from problems such as low pay, lack of childcare, the dual burden of paid employment, and domestic labour, poverty, and domestic and sexual abuse. The main sociological critique of liberal feminism is that it doesn't consider how wide the issue of gender inequality is. Liberal feminism fails to acknowledge that unequal positions of different genders are rooted deep within societal structures that have existed for centuries. Therefore, it's unlikely to require far more than just small acts of progress. Radical feminists typically argue that liberal feminism isn't ready to take more drastic action to protect women from oppression. Postmodern feminists generally reject the idea that all women share the same interests and that their position can be explained in terms of a single theory, and their differences should be celebrated. They reject the idea of progress, seeing it as a product of male rationality, and the idea of a single path to female liberation. Women's position can be improved by deconstructing masculine language and thinking. They attack the male way of thinking of women as the other. By allowing the voices of different women to be heard, the idea of women as an inferior can be broken down. Warby criticizes postmodern feminism for losing sight of the importance of inequality and the degree to which experience of oppression and inequality gives women shared interests. Warby accepts that there are differences between groups of women, but many still suffer from the effects of patriarchy, particularly older women, poorly qualified young women, and single parents. The most elite positions continue to be held by men. They also tend to neglect important areas such as the male use of violence to maintain power and gender inequalities at work. Social action and interpretive perspectives deny the existence of a clear social structure that tends to direct individual behaviour. Others accept the existence of a structure but see it as shaped by individuals. Both materialism and idealism play a part in explaining human history. Weber combined a consideration of social structure with a consideration of social action. He described sociology as the study of social action, which he defined as any intentional, meaningful behaviour which takes into account the existence of other people. Explaining social action requires Verstehen. One needs to understand what actions mean to people and the motives behind actions. Weber's study of the Protestant ethic, in which he discusses the meaning of Protestantism to some of its followers and the motives they have for working hard to reinvest money. Weber accepts the existence of institutions such as bureaucracies, but sees them as consisting of individuals carrying out social actions. Bureaucracies are organizations with sets of rules and hierarchical relationships, and they're composed of individuals pursuing rational social action intended goals to achieve. Weber saw the modern world as increasingly governed by rational social action. Pre-modern societies were regulated more by traditional social action. Lee and Newby argue that Weber is a methodological individualist. This is someone that reduces everything down to the actions of individuals and ignores how social structure shapes society. To the extent that Weber does deal with social structure, what he says seems to contradict some of his ideas on the importance of individual social action. Symbolic interactionists believe that people communicate with each other through language and symbols, and one can make sense of society through examining this. For symbolic interactionists, people are actively shaping society rather than being shaped by it. All interactionists believe in the importance of everyday interactions and meaningful objects in humans' lives. These can be material things, relationships, other people, actions, and symbols. Mead is usually seen as the founder of symbolic interactionism. Human behaviour is social because people interact in terms of symbols. Symbols stand for other objects and imply certain behaviour. Humans don't have instincts, and thus they need symbols in order to survive and interact. To understand the behaviour of others, you must imagine yourself as that person to try and understand the reasons for their behaviour. Individuals have a self, which is an image of what sort of person they are. This reflects how other people react to them. By taking the role of another, we build up a self-concept. Society has a culture and a plurality of social roles. These roles imply certain behaviours, but the roles are flexible and can change. Bloomer developed Mead's approach. He emphasises that people don't react automatically to external stimuli, but interpret their meaning before reacting. Meanings develop during interaction and aren't fixed. Rules and structures restrict social action and shape the interpretation of meaning to some extent, but they're never absolute, rigid, or fixed. Interactionists fail to explain where the norms, which partly shape behaviour, come from. They may underestimate the degree to which human behaviour is constrained. They neglect the role of structural factors in shaping human societies. It's concerned with subjective meanings but denies that one can produce causal explanations of human behaviour. This is phenomenology. Husserl, why is that literally the same name as me, argued that individuals organise chaotic sensory experience into phenomena. Phenomena are things which are held to have characteristics in common. The emphasis of phenomenology is to understand the essence of phenomena, the essential characteristics which lead to something being placed in a particular category. Phenomenology's Atkinson's work on suicide, which looked at why certain events are categorized as events. Now we're going to look at modernity. Postmodernism argues against the idea of objective truth. Some sociologists study different areas in human development and argue that there has been a movement from modernity to postmodernity, although others dispute this. Many sociologists have distinguished between pre-modern and modern societies. The change is often associated with industrialization. Marx, Weber, and Durkheim, and most classical sociologists see the development of modernity as progress. The Enlightenment is often seen as the starting point of modernity. The Enlightenment rejected the idea that figures should be limited by religious beliefs and tradition, and argued that humans could work out the best way to organise societies for themselves. Weber in particular saw the change from modernity in terms of the triumph of scientific rationality over superstition, tradition, and religious faith. Postmodern theories reject the idea that human society can be perfected through rational thought. They reject the idea that grand theories can discover truth. Lyotard argues that the move to postmodern culture started in the 1950s. The transition to postmodern culture involves changes in language games. Pre-industrial societies had a language game based on narrative. Narrators of stories have legitimacy because of who they are. With the Enlightenment, denotative language games became dominant. In these, statements are judged in terms of abstract standards of proof deriving from science. Science itself is based on meta-narratives, big stories which give meaning to other narratives. Scientific meta-narratives include the idea of progress through science and the possibility of conquering nature. Such meta-narratives influence events such as the French Revolution and helped to make Marxism popular in the 20th century. Lyotard argues that postmodernism leads to the incredulity towards meta-narratives. The meta-narratives of the 20th century failed to solve the world's problems and in fact made things worse. In postmodernism, denotative language games are replaced by technical language games. These aren't judged by standards of truth, but by standards of usefulness. Postmodern society is based upon producing saleable, useful knowledge rather than searching for eternal truths. It is more diverse, pluralistic, and tolerant than modern societies in which doctrinaire meta-narratives dominated. Critics argue that Lyotard's theory itself is a sweeping meta-narrative about the development of society. Lyotard advances little evidence to support his theory. Marxist Eagleton sees Lyotard's theory as a justification for uncontrolled capitalism, which puts profits before human well-being. Baudrillard sees society as moving through several stages. He argues that Marxists are wrong to see contemporary society as based on the production of material goods. The economy is increasingly based on the production and sale of signs and images. Signs have developed through 4 stages. Signs are a reflection of basic reality, a distortion of reality, a disguise in the absence of reality, and signs bear no relation to any reality. They become simulacra. Examples of simulacra is Disneyland, which reproduces imaginary worlds such as Future World. Baudrillard believes that politics has imploded into a meaningless exchange of signs in which politicians have no real power. People become trapped in a situation where image and reality can't be separated, particularly through watching TV. However, Harvey suggests that the decisions made by politicians make a real difference to people's lives. Baudrillard makes absurd statements, such as claiming that the First Gulf War was simply a series of images on TV screens. Postmodernism is seen as having a number of consequences for contemporary society. Pakulski and Walters argue class differences largely have disappeared and images have become much more important in defining status. Other sources of identity, such as age, gender, and ethnicity, become less significant as people can choose what identity to adapt. Featherstone and Hepworth believe deconstruction of life course has taken place. People no longer have to at their age, but can act however they like. Strinati describes postmodernism as typified by the triumph of style over substance, the breakdown of the distinction between low and high culture, confusions over time and space. Philo and Miller make a number of criticisms of postmodernity. It encourages political apathy as it denies the existence of an objective reality that social scientists can analyze. The emphasis on language detracts attention from real social problems. Postmodernism fails to challenge distorted or misleading images of reality presented by the media. And postmodernism ignores the growing inequalities of wealth and income, the growing power of corporations, and the increasing influence of market forces on social life. Numerous sociologists reject postmodern theories and argue that societies can be understood, explained, and improved using the late modernity. Giddens believes that societies have entered an era of high modernity. Despite important changes such as globalization, key features of modern society still remain. In particular, societies are still based upon the modern characteristic of reflexivity. This involves people reflecting upon the world and thinking about acting differently in future to improve things. People increasingly reflect upon all aspects of their lives and consider changing them. This makes contemporary culture increasingly unsettled and changeable. This isn't a feature of postmodernity, but an extension and development of a key feature of modernity. This is the last section on social policy. Sociology and social policy can have a number of relationships. Some sociologists believe that sociology should be value-free and should be concerned only with trying to describe and understand the social world. Others believe that the whole point of sociology is to try to make a difference and improve the world. What influence sociology does have on social policy is open to question. There are a number of possible relationships between the two. Sociology may be influenced by social policy. Sociology may directly influence social policy, or policymakers might use sociology selectively to justify policies. There are many examples of how sociological research has been influenced by social policies followed by governments. For example, the introduction of choice and quasi-markets into education stimulated much research into its effect on education. Changes in the welfare state have been researched, and researchers have studied the impact of social policies on the family. To some extent, social policies may have even helped to introduce new theories into sociology. For example, following the new right policies of Conservative government after 1979, new right perspectives on welfare developed in sociology. Sociology has affected social policies in a number of ways. The social democratic perspective on education encouraged the introduction of comprehensive schools by Labour governments in the 1960s and 1970s. Feminist campaigns have led to changes in education to prevent bias against girls and have led to offences such as domestic violence being taken more seriously by the police. The development of the concept relative poverty by Townsend led to anti-poverty programmes by Labour governments of the 1960s and 1970s and by New Labour. The right realist perspective on crime of James Q. Wilson has led to some new policies such as the introduction of ABSOs aimed at preventing areas from deteriorating due to antisocial behaviour. Late modernist Giddens was one of Prime Minister Tony Blair's main advisers in following New Labour's victory in 1997. Giddens helped devise a political philosophy of the Third Way, combining elements from the traditional left and right-wing policies. This influenced the idea of active welfare and the whole direction of social policy for recent Labour governments. Many sociologists don't believe that government consults sociology, accepts the findings of the most rigorous research, and then uses it to devise the best possible social policies for their party. There are many other influences on social policy, and in general, governments are only likely to take note of research which supports their existing policies, fits their ideological position, and is likely to win votes. Right realist views on crime and deviance may have influenced governments more than left realist views, because politicians believed that hard policies on crime were more likely to win votes. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it was helpful. If you haven't seen part 1, which is where I go over the methods of theory and methods, then make sure you check that out. Thank you for watching.